And we're back, and boy, do I have an exciting video for you this week in the studio. I had Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction here ahead of their CreateCon appearance this Friday.
Quick here.
Now, CreateCon is this really cool creative conference here in Portland. It celebrates and explores all sorts of different creative industries. So there will be Broadway producers and graphic designers and visual artists and songwriters and, of course, comic writers. Now, I don't think that Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction need an introduction, but in case you don't know who they are, take a look at your books. You probably have some of theirs on the shelf. Kelly Sue has written books like Pretty Deadly, Avengers Assemble, Bitch Planet, and also Captain Marvel. You know, Captain of My Heart was just turned into a smash hit movie. Yeah, you have her to thank for that story. She's also just written like so many characters that you love, from like Aquaman to Lady Sif to Steve Rogers, and the list truly goes on. And you know Matt Fraction from My Life as a Weapon, that incredibly popular Hawkeye story that you can see over my shoulder right here, and also Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Fear Itself, The Invincible Iron Man, The Immortal Iron Fist, and the list truly goes on. I'm running out of steam here. They're great. Separately, they have written some truly amazing comics, and together they had a lot of really insightful things to say about things like feminism in the comics industry and being married to somebody who does the same job as you, and also what they're working on right now, and all sorts of really fun stuff. And I am very boring in comparison, so I'm just gonna let them talk to you.
I'm sorry you have to find out like this. I hate being on camera and I'm wildly uncomfortable, so I will do my best.
Same, it's okay. Spoiler alert, she was incredibly lovely and charming. Almost every move you make is with consciousness towards feminism and working in comics. I read somewhere everything from including Sue into your name, and then the sexy leg lamp thing for the Bechdel test. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that's important. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of obvious, I mean, like if you can't get on board with the idea of inclusion for reasons of, I don't know, morals or ethics or compassion or humanity, I think then maybe we can get you on board. Practically speaking, we're at a point in the world where we can't afford to marginalize people. We need everyone to be able to contribute to the limits of their abilities and their imaginations. And in order for them to be able to do that, they need to have their basic needs met. So everyone needs to have health care. People should have equal pay. Once we get these basic things taken care of, then everyone will be able to contribute. And world's on fire, guys. We need all hands on deck. I mean, I'd rather that everyone was on board for the most basic reasons of humanity and compassion, but I'll take what I can get.
Sure, yeah, and you'll forgive me for asking that question so broadly. It seems super obvious to people who aren't garbage cans, but
Yeah.
the internet is full of garbage cans.
Yeah.
When you guys were working from, so I read this from another interview, so correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were working with DC, I guess Matt had said that equal pay or bust. Is that why? Like, forgive me for asking this so broadly. Again, it seems so dumb and simple, but like, why is that important? Why is it important for everybody to be on board here?
Fairness. It's fair, and fairness is right and good, and I don't know how to be a parent or a person in the world and to live by an ethos that I don't agree with, and she's better than I am anyway, so pay her what she's worth. And it was never it was never discussed. It was proposed, like, hey, do you guys want to come here? What are your terms? Those were the terms. It was never batted back. There was no argument made. DC was right off the bat, of course, to their eternal credit. It felt obvious and natural, and not just in the industry of comics, but in just every industry in this country. Women are traditionally underpaid for the same job, if not more work, and it just felt like I can't do that anymore. And if I got my career to a point where I could pull that kind of demand, if I could make that part of my writer, you know, like some folks can have green M&Ms, I'll settle for like Kelly Sue and I being paid equal.
Wow, what a world, honestly.
I will take green M&Ms, however, if that comes up.
Okay,
I'm just not going to insist on it in contract negotiation.
It's called leveraging privilege, right?
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly. What's the good of having privilege and power if you don't use it to give other people privilege and power? Like, I don't know.
So my parents, like I mentioned before, were both crime scene investigators, and so growing up, they talked a lot about the pros and cons of having a marriage and working in the same field. You understand a lot of the struggles, but then again, you kind of get into this whole world. All you do is sometimes talk about work. How does that go? Two writers in the house?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably much darker always talking about work if your work is around dead bodies. All of our dead bodies are like theoretical. So I enjoy talking about it. There's no one I would rather talk about work with, and work is something that I super love. So, you know, but I don't think it's the only thing we talk about, but it's certainly high up there, but it's fun. I care about it. I really like it.
And it's such a niche kind of gig that you develop a shorthand very quickly, and it's nice to have somebody in the house that gets it when, you know, I had a day where I worked all day long and I didn't write a word, and I know exactly what that day means. Like, she knows exactly what that day
That's
is.
a super frustrating day.
But it's very real. Like, it's great to have somebody that speaks your same arcane, weird little language.
Yeah, and I guess that's bottom rules for most marriages, that you hope that each other speak the language, whether you work the same job or not.
Stay on the same page anyway.
Right. Do you read each other's comics when they're finished?
When we have time. I think we're both behind on everything.
I think I'm caught up on
Are
it.
you really? I look bad.
Yes, we read it. Yeah, no, totally.
Sorry. And you just had a new beginning arc for Pretty Deadly come out.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? You obviously can't spoil anything, but very exciting.
Yeah. So it's been off the shelves for a while. Pretty Deadly came out, I don't even want to think about when Pretty Deadly first came out, but quite a while ago, and we had 2 completed arcs, and then we took a break, and we took a break that sort of grew. It was a longer break than was intended, and what?
Nothing. Go ahead. This is great. Keep going. This is awesome. I love this book so much, and you're the worst salesman in the world for it. It's astonishing.
Yes, it's incredible.
What's going on with Pretty Deadly? Well, it hasn't come out for a long time. We took a break. Oh, no.
We did! We took a break. It's back. And the 3rd arc is set in 1930s Hollywood land, and it is a murder mystery. It is heavily influenced by the work of the silent filmmaker Lottie Reniger. And it begins with a Peg Entwistle type suicide off of the Hollywood land sign. And then the rest of the arc is the investigation into that death. But because it's Pretty Deadly, there are supernatural elements and mythological and lots of thinky lines. So I love that book, desperately love that book, and desperately love working with Emma Rios.
Yeah, it's beautiful and it's great, and everyone I know is reading it. Likewise to my Superman's Project Mills, and everyone I know is both in their box. So
Right on.
That is a night out at the
people are
movies
interested-
between those two.
Yeah,
That is
that's
a
if they're interested in both, then they have them both. You know.
That's
They're
pretty
fine.
cool.
that is a whiplash-inspiring evening of
Yeah,
comics right there.
but we have a ton of crossover in readership.
That's true.
So, which is really fun. And sometimes people don't even know that
That's always funny.
we're married,
That's
which
great.
is delightful. We did a trailer for Pretty Deadly the Rat, which is something we've never done before. And I was really happy with it, so I want to do that more now. But we used our
Very much in a sort of silent film animated style, you know, and title cards and It was really atmospheric and spooky and
Yeah.
wonderful.
Guy named Jonathan, it was a couple actually, Jonathan and Haley Lyons have a company called Make Stuff. And they had like sent us a cold email. We're like, we love your stuff. Here's pictures of us getting our things signed from you, and we make videos. Would you want us to make a video for you? And I was like, yes, I would. So it was pretty great.
You're working on Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen with another local guy, Steve Lieber, who's like the nicest human I think I've ever met.
I think he's actually ranked the nicest human.
He's rated.
I read
for
that
sure.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Steve_Lieber on Twitter is the best place to follow me.
Yeah, like do that. And how is that going? Is it common to work with other local people, or is it just by happenstance? Like I don't really know how that.
I had worked with Steve before on an issue of Hawkeye that we needed to put out very quickly, where I gave all the money that I made from it to the Red Cross after hurricanes destroyed the East Coast. And so we had known each other kind of socially, and I am a great admirer of Steve's work. And that was one of those. Producing a book that quickly required kind of all hands on deck, and I work with another local artist named Jesse Ham, so we could all kind of get together and put it out. But Steve and I made a mental kind of note to like, let's work together again. And when I came up with what I kind of wanted to do with Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, it seemed like a perfect fit for Steve, not just because he was here in town, but because he's so multifaceted and so talented an artist, and so deft and effortless in everything he does that I knew he could pull it off. And I needed, and it's a pretty irreverent kind of, it's like an approach to storytelling, not like it's wacky and zany, although I suppose you can make an argument that's there, but it's a very non-linear, multiple genre. You'll get every 2 pages it's a new book by design, and I knew Steve not only had the chops to draw that, but sort of the throughput to keep it all in check. And you know, best of all, the best thing about working with Steve is he just makes everything better, and then I get to take credit for it.
That's great. I hope he hears that. And
sorry, Steve.
thinking all the way back to the Warren Ellis Forums days, did you guys think that comics would be this sort of phenomenon that it is currently?
Boy, that's hard because from our perspective, the industry has contracted, and we're very worried about comics right now. So it's always interesting to me that the outside perspective is like, comics are booming, like.
Yeah, but you know, I don't think I share. I think you're more pessimistic about it than I am.
Oh, man.
I understand the why of it all, but I also feel like. You mean that in a world where, could I ever conceive of a world where Avengers would be the #1 grossing film globally of all time?
Sure. Yeah. I guess maybe I do mean from the outside perspective, like that both people who you would never expect to be into superheroes or comics at all, and people who read the indiest of indie stuff would ever have something in common. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, boy, that was amazing. Like one year being at San Diego, and the biggest presences were Walking Dead and Scott Pilgrim. That was a oh, we won kind of moment. Or the flip side, something like Avengers, where I remember taking our daughter through a store trying to find something Wonder Woman, and
She was 2. She wanted Wonder Woman underwear for potty training.
Yeah.
And you couldn't
like,
get them.
Yeah, and so now the idea that there's, so much stuff. We go to shows now and people bring us things to sign we've never seen before. It's crazy. It's inconceivable on some levels.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think there's something cyclical in comics' ability to tap into the popular imagination, whether it was Superman in the 30s or the Batman show in the early 60s. You have these moments where there's comic book saturation everywhere. Still, comic book articles get written in mainstream media with pow, zap, right? So I think maybe depending on the day you asked, I would my cynicism would, or pessimism rather, would vary. I think the potential was always there. Whether or not I thought it would ever happen, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I think that I tend to be pretty optimistic, but in this one, I'm worried. I'm straight worried.
Why?
Because stores are closing at a phenomenal rate. Independent comic sales are down. Mainstream comic sales are down, except for the top 3 or 5 books are up, and everything in the mid list is way down. Numbers that used to be numbers that would get you canceled are now like, no, that's a hit. And independent books making back the cost of doing floppies is like names that should be able to do it no sweat are going into the red on singles and not coming out until the trades, and it worries me. And the other thing that worries me is, we're heavily dominated by the superhero genre, and we're heavily dominated by DC and Marvel as the most successful shared universe comics. And I have nothing against DC and Marvel. I have worked for them both. I love them both. I love both universes. I think superheroes are great. So there is no part of me that's like, I had your first album. It's like, great, I can love independent comics and I can love superhero comics. But I have a concern that while the industry, not quite as much as it used to be, it is still heavily dominated by those two companies, and those two companies have gradually become part of larger behemoth corporations. And comics have always been special because of the way that they work in the brain, and because of the way that we have always been cheap and fast and therefore innovative. So we could try things in comics because it's far less expensive to screw up in comics than it is.
Entire management suites of Hollywood studios get fired for taking the kind of chances we take every week in comics.
Yeah, and that's how we continue to innovate, and that's why television and film come to us for material, is because we can take those risks because we're very inexpensive. And as we've become part of these larger behemoths, and they have started to see us in terms of brand management, I am worried that we are going to forget what we're for.
Lose innovation in favor of servicing brands. Yeah.
Yes, we're not going to be able to innovate the way that we have always been able to, and they're going to kill the golden goose.
The flip side to that, which is very much like a old Ellis Forum kind of conversation, is, there's a generation of young creators now of college age that grew up reading Walking Dead or Scott Pilgrim or Raina's books.
Raina's books in particular, Raina Telgemeier.
Yeah, but the idea of working for Marvel or DC sounds insane.
Yeah, that was always what, as we were coming up, that was a brass ring, right?
Right.
That
Comics,
meant you made it when you'd done some DC or some Marvel work. There are kids now that are like, don't care.
So, a new book by Raina Telgemeier came out last week, and, we bought a copy at Target. If you'd have told me in 2000, one day the biggest graphic novel in the world would be on sale at Target, I would have said, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Is it Batman or X-Men? And you'd have said, no, it's about a teenage girl with a stomach ache. And I'd have lost my mind. Like, it's amazing, it's great. So you'll see, so that's the other thing, is that the superhero comics weren't serving the entire audience hungry for that content, so they built their own industry outside of Marvel and DC. And so that's interesting to see.
And that is, that is a good sign. And there's also the exponential growth of nonfiction comics is also, we were at dinner last night, and a friend of ours who's not like a comics person in the Wednesday comics pull box kind of way, pulls a copy of comics adaptation of the 9/11 report off of his bookshelf, and was like, I want one of these for the Mueller report, and was like, that's a very good idea.
Yeah, there are audiences out there being served by comics that traditional, that superhero comics, what we think of when we think of comic books, ignored for a long time. And rather than wait for the Batman, X-Men people to start talking to them, creators made their own paths and their own success. And now, you know, we live in a world where Spider-Man is Miles Morales and everybody wants to have Raina's career, not Raina's characters. You know, and that's a big difference. Like, oh yeah, no, I want to do the sisters from Sisters. Like, wait, that's not what they want to do. They want to do their own stories, and that's remarkable. That's amazing. And they get tired of waiting around. And so there are moments of hope. You see moments of comics realizing, oh, there's a lot of people we're not talking to. What if we told more stories? You know,
we are at a successful point in our careers and a, you know, how can I say this without sounding like I'm beating us up? But like, you know, we're solidly middle-aged, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So the kids are going to invent things I haven't thought of yet. And that's good. That's what kids are supposed to do. So the pessimism that I may have about the current structure of our industry and concerns that I have, and concerns that I have just for, like, nobody goes into comic book retailing because they want to make $1 bazillion. You don't make $1 bazillion. You go into comic book retailing, you open a store because you love comics. That's why there's no chain. There's no, like, national chain of comic book stores, because you don't make a lot of money that way, you know? So it's small independent stores, maybe a local chain, maybe somebody has 2 or 3 stores in a city, maybe, you know. But those people love comics, and I worry about them. I want them to be able to keep their lights on. I know comics will find a way because, you know, we're the original storytelling form. We are the paintings of Lascaux, right? So that comics aren't going to go away, but I worry about people in the industry losing, you know, their stores.
How do we solve that problem, do you think?
You know, Portland is an amazing example because there's a dozen stores in town.
Yeah, an
Each
embarrassment of riches.
An embarrassment of riches here, and they're all of them different than the other, and they're all of them keeping their lights on and their doors open. And it's a curatorial experience. It's a matter of a store owner with a vision for a marketplace that they don't see elsewhere, and they put that marketplace together and people come to it. Portland breaks the bell curve on comic stores. Everything that everyone tells you shouldn't work about comic stores, Portland throws out the window. So if it can happen here, surely it can happen anywhere, right?
Yeah, I would like to see, you know, I'm always bringing up Rainy Day Books in Kansas City, Missouri, because Rainy Day Books existed at a time when independent bookstores were going out of business because of Barnes & Noble and Borders. And Rainy Day Books managed to stay alive and thrive because they conceived of themselves as a community hub and built, like, they had something like 6 book clubs going in every different genre. And if you went into, you know, like you go into one of the big box bookstores and you're like, help me find this book. And they are totally like, yes, I will help you find that book. Or help me find this section. They will help you find that section. Recommend a book to me. You know, but you could go into Rainy Day Books and you'd be like, you know, I love science fiction, but I don't like Clark or Heinlein. Like, help me find warmer science fiction. And they'd be like, get out a pencil and paper. I have a list, and I also have a book club for you, you know, and like, and you can come here and you can find people to talk to about these things that you love.
And they remember their customers and build over time relationships, and you know, oh hey, you're back. You know, it's like a local bar that serves books instead of drinks. You know, they remember who you are and what you liked, and they've created a loyalty, and they endured all manner of economic storm.
Yeah, but I see comic book retailers that are reinventing themselves in those models as well. So, comic book clubs
Yeah, book clubs are
and
huge right now.
subscription services. There's
Like curated boxes, so it's not just your weekly pull, it's your weekly pull plus extra things that they may encounter.
yeah, and there's a comic book store in Pittsburgh, I think, that's a coffee shop as well, like a little coffee shop cafe comic book store, which I think is like, oh, that sounds lovely.
There's a couple of those here too.
Yeah. Oh, sweet.
So, yeah, but it's like finding a store that isn't just the one thing for the one kind of person, and knowing a audience and knowing a market and fulfilling a need.
I also recognize that I'm not a retailer. So there is I have ideas about what I think might work, but I also might not know what I'm talking about.
What y'all should do is just open up a store that's successful.
Yeah. So Matt at least used to work in a comic book store.
Right.
I worked in a video store, so.
I guess creating community with comic books kind of is the...
Community.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, look at comic conventions, they're...
More women than men now.
Yeah, and tons of people at comic conventions that are like comic curious and don't know where to start,
And every time there's another $2 billion commercial for comic books, it's a great opportunity to make new readers.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Before my dad was a crime scene investigator, he owned a comic book shop.
Oh, no way!
And yeah, so before I was born, but that's where all this nerd shit comes from. And the kids who shopped in his store now have a store back in my very small hometown. It's the only store for miles because it's like the only mall for miles. And they still ask about them, and that's the kind of shop you can go into, and you're like, I like this. You got anything like this? And they're like, here is a stack of books, So it's nice to hear, that kind of stuff matters, because those are like, like the little guys. And like, I think about shops like Floating World, where I go in there and they partner with me and they recommend me books every week. Every week they have something. They're like, hey, I know you liked this. I think you'd like that. Like, that's like just an enjoyable weekly experience to go into a place and they kind of know who you are, or you can tell them what kinds of things you read and they know who you are. So that's...
Ultimately, you can just walk in not knowing what you're into, but Jason is like a guy on permanent safari. And what have you found this time? Like, well, let me show you my wares from the exotic corners of comics. Versus stores like Excalibur that are like fantastic Wednesday superhero comic kind of, and again, it's a family store and
woman owned and run for like 40 years or something.
Kids do great, and just like that sort of, everybody can find their shop here in town,
I just want to thank Kelly Sue and Matt for stopping by and chatting with me about just nerd stuff and being incredibly good sports, because while I had these very smart people here, I decided to waste their time with what I called the Nerdlywed Game. How excited are you for CreateCon?
So excited. Great. So here we go.
How excited? Hang on, Karnak. Me going into CreateCon. I could take a minute. I could figure out a way to do this that would be funny and not offensive.
Oh,
I'm gonna do offensive ones right off the top of my head.
Yes.
Very excited for CreateCon this weekend. We'll be there on Friday.
He's an introvert.
You can click up here somewhere to see that video, because I'm fancy now and I can do that. I think I may have made an enemy of Mad Fraction, but you'll have to check out that video to see. All right, we're gonna switch, and you're gonna get the same question.
No fair! No, she's not. No, that's garbage.
Thank you so much for watching. If you're new here, please subscribe. I talk about nerd stuff and I review comics, and I hope to talk about movies and video games and stuff in the future, and I would really appreciate it. And that's really all I have for you folks. I will see you next week, same-ish time, same place. And until then, this has been KGW's Talk Comics of the Week.